Okay, we're taking some time here to thumb through a couple of things, and I'm sort of experimenting. I thought it would be a great time to go through a couple of things. These are things which I covered in very great detail in a video that I've already produced, but I thought I would take the time to go over some of these aspects of the heavens and the earth. Whenever we discuss the heavens, just think about this with me for a moment, okay? Whenever we think about the heavens, we look at uh, the authority of heaven. We look at Jerusalem in the Old Covenant. Whenever we talk about the authority of heaven, we look at people sending to Jerusalem. In the New Testament, Paul referencing Jerusalem, saying that Sinai answers to Jerusalem. Galatians. So we see that as a symbol of authority. And it's rather confusing because there's times that Jerusalem is spoken of and would actually reference all of the Jews, etc. But in terms of the heavens and the earth, we're talking about authority whenever we talk about Jerusalem. And in some cases, other cases, of course, you're going to be talking about the mother. She mothered the Jews. But it's also where the authority was. That's where the capital city was. And it's representing heavenlies, reserved for you in the heavens. You are approaching to the heavenly Jerusalem. He's letting you know that Jerusalem was a symbol of the heavenlies. It's the holy city, the city of exaltation. The temple. The temple was a physical manifestation of the heavenlies in terms of the presence of God. So you have two things involved there. When you talk about the heavenlies, you're talking about the authority of God, and you're also talking about the presence of God. Okay, so whenever people address this, they need to understand that whenever they cover Jerusalem and the temple in the terminus theories that are present among us, all they have actually addressed from 2 Peter chapter 3 is one thing. That's the heavens. They have not touched the earth at all yet. And Peter in 2 Peter 3:10 points out that the heavens and the earth would be burned with fervent heat. But before we get really deep off into that, let's look at something starting at the beginning of God making promises to Abraham. Genesis 12:1 and Genesis 17:7 through 8. So the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you." 25 years later, it says, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also, I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Now, we find out later on in the narrative that what's actually being referenced here is something spiritual in the long run. It ends up being something spiritual. And we learn that Abraham, when he left out of his father's house, he was seeking a heavenly country. So we know for 100% fact that, number one, the new would not come until the old passed away. I really wish we could just get that in our head. The new would not come until the old passed away. Abraham died having not received the promise. Right? And Abraham, even though he physically measured a physical land called Canaan, what he was actually seeking for was a heavenly country whose builder and maker is God. Right? So we see here that the promised land was of the things that was still to come, and the old was to be destroyed before the new would come. So the question here at the bottom says, how much of Canaan was part of the promise to Abram? You don't have to answer that. That's pretty obvious that he's referencing all the land of Canaan there, right? Okay. On to the next one here. Let's look at this. And we're going to get to a point where this is very important, because we don't want to pretend as if there's something that's listed specifically in prophecy, and then the fulfillment comes, and then we say, oh, well, that's not a fulfillment of prophecy. Think about that real quick. Okay, so we have in Deuteronomy 28:15, but it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commands and his statutes which I command you this day, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. This is the curses here. You see in this next verse it says that they would be cursed in the country. Well, that's interesting. Look, skip down here to verse 30. Look at this. The Lord will send on you cursing, confusion, and rebuke, and all that you set your hand to, until you are destroyed, and until you perish quickly. Until you are destroyed? Wow. Is he talking physical destruction here? Because of the wickedness of your doings in which you have forsaken me, the Lord will make the plague cling to you until, how long? Until he has consumed you from the land which you are going to possess. And I got another question here. What land were they going to possess? Would all prophecy be fulfilled before the time that they were consumed from off the land, according to this? No, absolutely not. Not possible. How much of the land could they remain in the end, if this promise was to be fulfilled? Hopefully this is being said in such a way that you have to starkly answer, well, they couldn't be in any of it. So look at this right here. Moses even warned the future Jewish inhabitants of Canaan that if they were disobedient, that the following would occur. I'm going to enlarge this for you some. You shall therefore keep... Actually, I'm enlarging it for me. I can't see that well. Therefore you shall keep all my statutes and all my judgments and perform them, that the land where I am bringing you to may not vomit you out. And you shall not walk in the statutes of the nation which I am casting out before you, for they commit all these things, and therefore I abhor them. How is he abhorring them? He's driving them out and burning their city. He's lighting it on fire. And it shall be, another verse, Deuteronomy 28:63, that just as the Lord rejoiced over you to do good and multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and bring you to nothing. And you shall be plucked up from off the land which you go to possess. So, are they talking about Canaan here? Oh, they were spiritually going to be plucked off the land? No, we know that's not the case. Go read the entire context there and you'll see what all he's referencing. We see the physical fulfillments through and through right there. Here's another one, 28:52. They shall besiege you at all your gates until your high and fortified walls, in which you trust, come down throughout all your land. And they shall besiege you at all your gates throughout all your land, which the Lord your God has given you. I don't see how it can be spelled out any more clear than that. Is it any wonder then that each and every Jewish land was ridded of its inhabitants and burned during the Jewish-Roman war, precisely as it happened to the Canaanites under Joshua? Now, are we going to hesitate to label the desolation of Canaan a fulfillment of prophecy? I don't think we should divorce any of this from its true context, because we have a preconceived idea about a temple. It's all part of prophecy. And here's the reason why we can't divorce it. It's because the land of Canaan was one of the elements. We discussed what the heavens was. Now, the earth, the land, then, is Canaan. This is the entirety of the kingdom here, right? Who is supposed to be the king? Well, it's supposed to be God, since they basically, in a roundabout way, divorced his, I don't know, in a way. I mean, he said, whenever you choose Saul, it was going to be Saul. Whenever you choose this king, or I'll choose him for you. But just know that whenever you accept him, you're rejecting me. So they had already rejected God as their king, so they had to have it was inevitable that they were going to end up having to have a place where they could come to even be in his presence. We know we're not worthy. This was a temple that was a physical element being used to teach them about the presence of God. Jerusalem was a physical element to teach them, all of those that were Jews, about the authority of God and about his holy city. But you still had that other element there that involved the entire land, in which God would remove them whenever they were disobedient, to teach them about the captivity of sin, and to teach them about the greater spiritual realities of the holy promised land. So we've got a lot of things I went over thoroughly in the video. I'm just going to touch on them real briefly. Let me see. Stoicheia is the word that's repeatedly used when it talks about the elements here, melting with fervent heat. And basically I'm just explaining to you what I just did in a nutshell. I go over the 7 verses in the Bible where the word stoicheia is used. I quote some of the scholars here that translate. We got one verse here in Colossians 2:8. Let me enlarge this for me. Got another one in Colossians 2:20. The rudiments, the elementary rule. Galatians 4:3. And if you don't think that they were under a law concerning the land, you can think again. They were under this elementary rule, and it had control over them. Now, I see another verse here in Galatians 4:9. There's another verse here that I wanted to touch on. Let me peek through here real quick. I believe I've already passed it. Yeah, this is Galatians 4:9 right here. Bring it to the top so you can see what I'm talking about right here, this one. Okay. He talks about them being slaves by those who were by nature not gods. Now, who were they slaves to? That's right. They were slaves to other nations, and they actually their emperors did call themselves gods. And so the elementary rule here that's being referenced is the land of Canaan. And he used other nations to teach them by making them become their slaves. And this is what was bringing them into captivity from the land. And so, even though, just like the stars, it's still a reference of the heavenlies, and all of these things centered around temple worship due to the festival calendar. Even though it says stars, it's still centering around the temple. The temple was the element that they were, the element that was being used to teach these guys about various things, but they all centered around the temple. He wasn't going to light the stars, the literal stars of heaven, on fire, but he used the stars to center them around the temple. And the temple was the physical element, which had the elementary rule there, or was the first principles, which you can also use a different way to describe, to teach them about the things that were to come, about being in the presence of God and being the temple, and how you wouldn't have to go to a certain place to be in the presence of God, that place being Jerusalem, the place where the Jews answered to, the symbol of heavenly power. But all of these things were being used to teach them, and this here in this verse is a reference to the land of Canaan, specifically, as being part of the elements. Now, I go into this in some great detail on the video again if y'all just want to check out the video. And I'm kind of playing with this new app on my phone too, hands down, trying to see how it's going to turn out. It's just a screen sharing thing. If you like it, you can download it on Google Play. Check it out for yourself. But I wanted to zero in on this from Thayer. Thayer talks about some interesting thing here about elements. And he even points out that it's reference to the heavenly bodies. Talks about man's destiny. Talks about their festivals. And that goes back to that, right? But check this out. The funny thing about the word itself is elements. Look at the passage thing above here. It says it's associated with the very beginning or the makeup of the earth. So the word stoicheia in and of itself is going to give you the fundamental building blocks of heaven and earth in the meaning of its word, in some senses. So if you want to get a more well-rounded view of all this, then it's as simple as asking yourself what the fundamental building blocks was of this covenantal world that the Jews were living in. The fundamental building blocks there, in order for them to answer to Jerusalem, there had to be more of a land that would answer to Jerusalem, right? That's hopefully easy to understand. Let me see what I got there. A lot of stuff like that. And of course, they would all be coming to the presence of God, which was in the temple, from various parts of the land. These were the fundamental building blocks of the entire Old Covenant world, you know. And if we isolate this down to just the temple, we're selling ourselves short, because we're not getting a full picture of the beautiful things that God was using. And guess what? God used the entire Jewish nation to teach the world about the things to come in Christ. That's right. Because through the Jewish nation, other nations were taught about the judgments of God. That's right. So even Israel as a people was used in some instrumental ways to teach the entire world about the judgment that was to come upon all nations. Now that's another one. I'm not really going to touch on that a whole lot. because there may be a lot to understand there. And a lot of that is going to have a lot of prophetic symbols and stuff like that. And that's why I used a lot of basic verses here to teach and show that in these elemental teachings, there were a lot of physical, literal aspects to this, and they were definitely carried out in the Bible, and these things are undeniable. So, what was the conclusion of the elementary rule? That it was the law and it was their tutor. These things were not necessarily literally burned up, even though the law was kept in the Holy of Holies. I mean, I'm sure it was burned with the temple, but that's not the point. These things were being used to teach them about the grand scheme of God's redemption and of His judgment. And these things that were being used were going to be burned with flames. And indeed, we look at it historically. Things that extended in their destruction beyond the time that the temple was burned, which would actually cause the destruction of heavens and earth to take a period of 7 times. 7 times. Isn't that interesting? And I think the earth would actually go around the sun an entire time in a year. So you look at 7 times being the time that destruction was taken to occur. We see 7 days in the creation in Genesis. So we see 7 years in the destruction. We see 7 years in the, 7 days in the creation, and we see 7 years in the destruction. So those are the 3 elements that I conclude are what would necessarily be burned, without assuming that all of the history that couples with this is an absolute coincidence. That's the easiest way I can put it exegetically. Hopefully you can latch on to that. And I explained some of this stuff already right here. But you have the word earth. In the Hebrew, it's eretz, and it's gay in Greek. The thing that we see here is that whenever the land is being referenced, it's pretty commonly noted until we start talking about the temple. Exactly what is being referenced whenever that word is used, when it talks about the earth. I just read a verse to you just a minute ago, or a promise to Abraham. That would have been the Eretz. That would have been the land. That's the land of promise. And in terms of covenant language, we're talking about the land of Canaan. So, thus, whenever Peter references the elements melting with fervent heat, and he says the earth, that is precisely the same earth that Peter is referencing. And this doesn't mean that a person's a heretic or anything like that if they don't grasp that. But I think it's profitable for you to get a better picture, a fuller picture with all the pieces, so that you can have a better understanding of what was intended to be taught by God to the Jew in terms of the element of the earth. And maybe we can grow more by it as well. This has been a brief video. I'm going to cancel it out now. Let me see if I cancel this the way I used to. Let me see here. Don't know. I'll find out how to end this video soon. And I may play it back and see what I think about it. I may share it. I may just upload it. But I wanted to spend a little bit more time explaining that. I know I may not have spent 1,000,000 hours explaining I had an hour and 20-minute video on this. I really want you to fathom this. If y'all think I need to go back and spend more time on these videos, y'all let me know. And if I need to break each step down a little more, I can do a few short videos to explain each thing that I was describing in the video. And here it is. And hopefully you can all be edified by this as we attempt to grow and learn more about the Word of God. It's like I always say, this isn't even an official CPN episode. It's just something I thought I would share with you. I think every brother I've actually had an opportunity to sit down and study about this with them, they don't have a problem with it. They don't see this as something that's going to try to contradict fulfilled eschatology, covenant eschatology, or anything like that. It actually goes along with it perfect, and it's just another piece of the puzzle. Just put it where it fits, and you'll get a better view of what the entire picture looks like. So y'all have a great and blessed day. If it don't happen good with you, let it work good in you. And this is David D. Gates, and I'm out.